Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trans Connections podcast. I'm your host, Allison, and today I have a very special guest on with me. Somebody that I connected with on Instagram via our love for off-road racing, as well as our mutual navigation of coming out in that world. So I will go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
My name's Allison. On Instagram, I am all new Allie. I'm 35 years old. I started transitioning I've been on hormones for about 14 months and coming up on 2 years since I sort of figured out that I wanted to transition, and since kind of I started heading down that path.
Very nice. Yeah, like I said, I think both of us pretty early on. I think you found me through a photo I posted of
Yeah, that was
my race
awesome.
Jeep. You actually did a video yesterday about your race truck. Little different than what I do, but still off-road racing. Do you want to talk about it
Yeah.
a little bit?
Uh, Racing is something that goes really far back in my life, and especially the whole off-road thing, and just cars in general, I would say. Um, so my dad was always kind of in cars, and then it was into cars, and then it was always sort of assumed that as I grew up, I was going to be into cars too. And I think I asked my mom one time because my dad always had. Growing up, my dad had a Mustang, which I actually have now. He was nice enough to pass that one down to me. He had a Mustang, and then he had a Chevy Blazer, like the full-size Blazer. And I talked to my mom at one point, and she had said that I always knew that you'd either end up with, for your first car, I knew you'd either end up with a Mustang or a Blazer. And so I actually ended up with a Blazer when I was 15 and a half. I saved up my money and went and bought one. And um, growing up on the Central Coast, we've got Pismo Beach close by. And so it's actually one of the few places in the country where you can actually take a vehicle and drive out on sand dunes and be able to go out and do that. And so when I was in high school, I spent a lot of time going out there and ended up kind of learning the automotive world and learning how to work on cars because I would take the Blazer out to the sand dunes and inevitably break it and then have to come home and fix it. And then I learned pretty quick that if you're going to do that, you should have something for fun and something for actually getting to school because half of my senior year in high school, I had to catch rides because my vehicle was broken. Um,
That sounds a lot like my high school. Not beaches. We were in the mountains, but yeah, very much the same. Breaking stuff, trying to figure out how to get home to drive to
Yeah.
school the
So
next day.
I ended up getting the whole off-road racing thing because, I had the truck, I'd go to Pismo. But this would have been back in like 2000 and 2003, 2004. And that's when in Southern California, this whole pre-runner thing was starting to get really popularized and you'd kind of
Mm-hmm.
start seeing that. And so I remember seeing like every night, like there were just a few, but like they'd sort of like pop up. And then I got interested or I got introduced to like Baja racing and like off-road desert racing by a friend and then went out with him to a race. And the first time I went out there and I saw a trophy truck doing 120 miles an hour across the desert and standing right there while it goes by and being able to see what those machines were capable of was something that just absolutely blew me away. And at that point, I told my friend, I said, I have to do this. Like, I have to be a part of this. I have to experience this. And so came home and started looking for a project vehicle. That was kind of how I got into the whole off-road racing thing. And then um, ended up doing it for about 10 years after that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's almost exactly what me and all my friends were doing in high school. I mean, senior skip day, we literally broke all of our Jeeps. Got so stuck, we had to call our parents to come tow us out. So all our parents knew we were skipping on senior skip day. Uh, and then literally we saw, so we were into Ultra 4, so little different, mostly slow going off road racing, but still doing 100 plus in the desert. Um, And we saw that in a magazine and we're like, holy smokes, we have to figure out a way to get into this somehow. And then the stock class was formed, and all of a sudden it was a possibility. Um, that was like definitely one of the best experiences of my life, though, getting into racing. Um, I know that when you and I first started talking, a lot of your questions were how was coming out in the off road and racing world. Um, and I had just started that process myself. What have your experiences been?
Long story short is it's actually been really good. I think, one of that was one of my biggest concerns because for so long throughout my life, like that was my life. Racing was my life, and specifically in the off-road community. And, just in general, the car crowd tends to be a little bit more right. And then, especially when you get into the off-road crowd, you're almost a joke if you are, voting for anybody other than the Republican candidate. And so it was, having just like sat around campfires with friends and having to, just stay quiet when I'd hear them say certain things about certain types of people. And, I know now that, a lot of times it's just kind of going with the crowd. It's not necessarily what that individual believes, uh, but because of that, like I was super afraid to come out to these people. It was a huge fear of mine, even to the point where I had come out to my family and I had come out to a lot of friends, but not really that side of me. And so yeah, I was really afraid about that initially.
Yeah, I think I spent 2 months with a therapist talking about how I was going to come out to my team. And they were the first ones that I wanted to come out to. But it was definitely very, very scary. But at the same time, they've been so supportive. I got out of racing pretty quickly after that due to other reasons, not related to my transition. Um, and all of the team has been extremely supportive even after the fact. So I know personally I've had some really great experiences. Um, with regards to racing, do you miss not doing it? Because I know you haven't been in it for a little while.
So as far as the racing itself goes, the last time I raced, the last time I was entered in a race was in 2010. And so that was actually a race. It was the last race of the MDR series, and what ended up happening was 10 spectators ended up dying at that race.
Oh wow.
And so I this was the last time I'd raced. I did most of my racing when I was still going to college. And so then after graduating, I got a full-time job, and that ended up taking most of my time. But I kind of settled things down at work, and that was the last race that I'd come back and entered in. And I was, signed up for the race, entered in the race, showed up, was on the starting line, was about 3 cars from starting because they do the staggered starts,
Mm-hmm.
just like the Ultra Four stuff. Um, and so I was about 3 cars back on the starting line. Then they held us up, and they weren't telling us what was going on. But what ended up happening was there was this in that race. There's this one section about 3 miles in or so where there's sort of a big jump. Spectators like to crowd around that jump. It's also a night race.
Mm.
And so the night race was always really, really popular because everybody likes to come out and spectate and drink and watch the racers do their thing. And so,
It's easy when you don't have to work and
yeah, so it is a fun race to go to. Like I'd been to quite a few of those, and but the problem is the spectators always want to see the part where the trucks are doing the most interesting things, and most of the time that's
mm-hmm.
where something's potentially going to go wrong. So, so yeah, so they had held us up. They stopped us at the line, and one of the trucks had gone over the jump like it's supposed to do, and landed and broke apart, rolled, and then rolled into the crowd. And the
Oh
crowd
wow.
wasn't necessarily standing at a safe distance. They'd had some barriers in place, but people weren't necessarily paying attention to them. Um, and yeah, and so it was really bad. And then I think it was a little bit later that they came back and told us that the race wasn't going to happen. And so at that point, kind of went back to camp. And so that was the last time I actually raced. And so even like coming into this, like I hadn't really raced much, but I'd say in the last probably 3 or 4 years, um, I had after that race where people had died, I sort of let my truck sit for a while and then found out some stuff was wrong with it, and so didn't really want to deal with it, and then started getting back into it and got it up and running again, and sort of got it like gave it a little bit of a facelift, and then started going back out with friends and spectating at races instead of um, participating in them, but taking my truck out and actually having a lot of fun with it. Um, and had sort of like reamassed a group of friends that I would routinely take the truck out with and go out and go camping and go adventuring and do fun stuff. And so it was so I think the last time I went to a race was actually one that you were at, King of the Hammers. And so that was the last time that I had my truck out in the desert. Like you said, that was I think February of 2019,
Mm-hmm.
and took it out, had an absolute blast. The truck worked great. Had a fun time with my friends. My brother came out, and I think about 2 months after that, I ended up getting married. And then about a month after I got married, month and a half after I got married, was sort of when I, had this big pivotal moment where I admitted to myself that I was trans and sort of finally accepted that if I wanted to, I could transition.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know that I haven't. First of all, I was never married. I feel like that may have been a blessing in disguise for me. Um, Me individually, not that it's wrong for anybody else. Just was not working for me. Actually, I got out of a relationship, and that's what helped me determine that I probably should start questioning my gender a little bit more. And ironically, she told me that I was always looking at her in a weird way, almost like trying to understand what she was doing and how she was doing it, opposed to looking at her like she was beautiful. So I guess that kind of makes sense. From a racing standpoint, though, being in that world, I had already been in it for almost 2 years when I was ready and actually racing. When I was ready to start kind of coming out to people, and it was certainly that race in general was the race that I came out to my team. Several of them before the race, so a couple of them knew going through the race that day. That was a long day too. I think we were out there for like 12 plus hours. Leave the line at 8 and didn't get back until probably close to 9 o'clock that night. Get back to the base or our garage. So certainly, racing has been a big part of, and that whole world. I'm hoping to get back into the spectating piece of it, and hopefully get back into from a photography standpoint, since that's kind of been what I've really gotten discovered as a passion of mine. I would love to get out and do some more of the like those types of the desert type of races as well, though. I think all of that stuff is just so much fun.
Yeah, the actually, so let's see. So that's not necessarily the last race that I went to. It's the last race that I took my truck to. I think it was about a month or so after that that I actually went to the Mint 400.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so I went there and spectated and got some really cool photos actually. Not with any sort of a fancy camera, but just with my phone. Um, and it was just really cool because it's one of these sports where it's especially when they have like the setup spectating area. It's like you're 20, 30 feet away from the actual vehicles that are in the race, and they do things like put up speed limits and no passing zones, but whether somebody actually pays attention to that is probably
It probably
you're
mostly,
pretty
yeah,
lucky if they actually pay attention to that.
mostly depends on
It's
who
kind
the
of
organization is.
right, yeah. So like this one in particular, like we're in a spectating area. It's supposed to be a no passing zone. There's supposed to be a speed limit, um, but someone still decided that they were going to pass and came up on the back of somebody's tire and almost rolled their vehicle, and then sort of changed directions at the last minute and sprayed rocks on the entire spectating area, which actually broke the rear window of my
Oh,
Chevy, which I was really
yeah,
upset
for
about.
sure.
Um, and then getting to drive home from basically Vegas to Southern California with Nova Rear Window is also a lot
Yeah,
of
I
fun.
cannot imagine how. Well, I can actually, because when I was in college, I drove a Jeep Cherokee with no roof on it for 2 years, so totally understand
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, it was really great too because the ex-wife was with me, and so were all our so were our two dogs. Uh,
Probably not
that
helping
wasn't fun.
any of the
She was
relationship.
not
Yeah,
very
I'm
happy.
sure.
Yeah, it was yeah, but so that was a lot of fun. So that was the last race I spectated at, but and yeah, that's one of the fun things about the sport though is that it is really fun to watch. Sometimes it can be boring, like when, because you might see a whole bunch of trucks come by and then it might be 20, 30 minutes or something before some more come by, but it's still really cool and you get some really great photos.
Yeah, and just the experience. I mean, I spectated KOH before I raced in it. That race is just so much fun to just be out there. I mean, you
Hmm.
literally have 60,000 lunatics running around, driving around in their
It's
lifted
nuts. It's
vehicles.
so
Yeah, it's
crazy.
insane. And the amount of dust and everything that's going on, it's crazy how people just come out there. The first time we were there, we were literally just hanging around a campfire, and some guy drove by in a Jeep with only three wheels on it and asked us if we saw a wheel roll by. Like literally, he was looking for the fourth wheel on his
That's
truck.
great.
It was so
Uh,
awesome. And that's just that whole community too, though. They're all really friendly when they get to know each other, and I think that's like you said, it's kind of weird to think about that community being welcoming and friendly to people like us when they're as
mhm.
conservative as they can be, but they're just all really great people in general. And I think that's something that I learned specifically when I was going through my transition and coming out to different people, and helping kind of trying to figure out and understand, um, who was going to support me and who wasn't. I discovered not a lot of people weren't going to support me.
It's crazy. And I think a lot goes into, I think one, the type of person that you are to begin with. I think if you're a good people or if you're a good person, people don't, typically forget that. And, if you are a good person going into it and they have fond memories of you from, before you came out to them, I think that's sort of one thing going for you. I think the other is if you take a tactful approach with coming out and explaining things to them and being understanding about what they're going through as well and the fact that this is going to be new for them, it's going to be awkward for them, and then you're going to have to help coach them and educate them. And but it's been my experience that if you do that well, that a lot of these people, they will support you because they have a preconceived notion of what a trans person is, but that's something that's just been handed down to them from other people or maybe a group of people, and so they don't really have any experience in that area. And then once you come out to them, you are essentially becoming the real experience. And so, ideally, unless you're working with a really closed-minded person, your experience should overwrite their non-existent experience. And if that goes well and you do a good job explaining it, then in my experience, it's worked out well. And all of these very conservative people that I've had these conversations with um, have been very accepting. And even recently, as I've started to kind of get back into that community and talk to people within it, and people found out from my big Facebook post that I had posted to all of my old friends. Um, but then also that people had sort of heard it through the grapevine, and they told me that like, yeah, I knew I'd heard it from some people. I didn't know if it was true, but it's like in the times that we had talked since then, not in person, obviously, but in the times that we talked since then, like I wasn't going to bring it up. I wasn't going to ask you if you're trans. I wasn't going to ask you if you were a girl now. Like, and it's like I get that, and it's just kind of funny, like hearing it from that perspective now, and like even these people that I didn't have that really close conversation with,
No,
they don't care. It's it doesn't affect them. It's like they're not great with the name and the pronouns and stuff like that. It's like and it takes time, and I'm not necessarily gonna pressure them on that too much when we don't even hang out all that often. Um, but yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised, and it gives me kind of it gives me hope for the future in that regard, and then I think too, it also just makes me feel like I'm doing something good in the world, just sort of being myself and letting these people that like not shutting them off and communicating with them and sharing my story with them and letting them sort of actually have an experience with a trans person so that they can realize that, I'm just me and and that, because I think a lot of people just have this vision that being trans is, if they've never met somebody or they've, they probably have met somebody who's not known it, but, um, most people that, can't look at someone and be like, oh, that person's trans, like they will just sort of assume that being trans is, being a guy in a dress, being RuPaul's Drag Race kind of stuff. And so a lot of times it's really off base. And when they find out somebody that they've had good times, like, driving crazy vehicles through the desert and BSing around a campfire, like that kind of thing, when they find out that people that they have had good, enjoyable times with, um, are in fact trans people, it really sort of rewrites that code and allows them to sort of rethink what they think it is to be trans. And so it's almost like I kind of see it as an opportunity where I can go be in that community and I can, people can have that experience. And I think the more support that I have within my little group, the more likely I am to go venture out into that and let other people find out. And eventually it's going to get out. It's already sort of like a thing around town that, you know, that this person that used to race trucks is,
Hmm.
now transitioning. And so I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's a challenge, but
Yeah,
I think it's
I
going to be good in
agree.
the long run.
For me, the more people that I talk to, and like in the racing community specifically, like the more I talk to them, and the more that can that are supportive of me, the more confidence I have in continuing to just go do that and enjoy it and have fun. And I enjoy it more now than I did before. Um, like that whole last year of racing for me, while trying to hide who I was not fun. And now I get to go be a part of that and just be me and enjoy it so much more and have the support of all of the people that I care about in that community that want to care about me as well. And that just makes it so much more fun because you're just getting to spend time with people that you want to spend time with.
Yeah, totally. I when I realized I was trans, it was a big thing for me, and I pretty much I really focused on my life and on transitioning, and I feel like I started to move things along pretty quickly. And I did have a lot of other things going on in my life. Like I moved within that time frame. Once I moved, I started renovating my house. Was dealing with my previous relationship, and then eventually getting out of that. So there was a lot going on within that time. But like I really distanced myself from that whole off-roading community, and so I kind of just like gave up on it. Like I couldn't even imagine what it was like, you know, continuing to do that and
Yeah,
be a
I
part of
don't.
that.
I
Like
mean, I
that would be
certainly was
tough.
just hiding it. Like there were very few people in the community that knew anything about who I was and what I was going through, and the ones that did were literally just my team. I mean, we literally replaced the top end of a motor overnight one night, and it was just me and the team doing that, and the rest of the people that were talking to us or hanging out with us at the early parts of the night or early in the morning the next morning were they had no idea what they or who they were calling Allison throughout the whole night. Like they didn't understand, they didn't question it, but they also didn't quite like it was new to all of them. None of them even understood it or asked what like who's Allison? Why are you calling somebody Allison at like there's only four dudes here. What's going on? Um, and like I think that was probably the hardest part because every time it happened, I just was like, hey guys, I don't think that person knows. You literally just outed me to them. And how are they going to
Hmm.
react? Fortunately, they didn't, and unfortunately, we blew the motor again that same the next day. I mean, it's hard to break in a motor when your race starts an hour before you finish, or an hour after you finish. So, and when
It's
you put it
true.
together in the desert, there's bound to be some dirt and dust that gets into the top end of the motor. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well,
There's dirt and
that was in
dust
Oklahoma, so it
everywhere.
wasn't quite KOH dusty, but it was bad.
Hmm. That's really interesting though about like because I've experienced that too because there is like a little while during transition where you're sort of in this middle ground where some people know and some people don't know and I think that was kind of hard for me and I think that's why I eventually came out on my old Facebook profile because I'd created a new Facebook, I'd created a new Instagram, and so I had this whole other side and I didn't necessarily think I was going to even come out on Facebook, but what it kind of came down to was that, like, I know that there's a lot of people that were going to start finding out through the grapevine, or I was going to start having these situations where I'm hanging out with so and so, and they know, and then someone else calls them up and says, like, hey, do you want to hang out? And then puts you in that situation where it's like, am I going to have to like come out to them on the fly? Because that's not the greatest thing. Or is this person just going to like meet me and have to do that? So I ended up coming out on Facebook just kind of for that reason. But honestly, thinking a little bit about that, I had a similar instance last night, which is actually I was hanging out with my dad and my stepmom, and I was over at their house, and we were getting ready to barbecue some hamburgers, and my dad's friend and his wife came over, and I don't know to what extent they know that I'm trans. I think it's probably been mentioned to them, but they've never seen me. I'd never even met them before in person, honestly. They just knew that my dad had two sons, and I think they probably heard that one of those sons was trans. But they came over and it was awesome, and
Yeah.
they had no problem with name and pronouns and stuff because they'd never even met me. So it's like this was the only reference point they really had. But it was difficult because my dad kept
Mm.
screwing up my pronouns, and it's not in a negative way. Like he tries, he's very an in his head kind of person, and so something like this, like he really relies on a lot of just sort of like muscle memory to some extent. And so because of that, he does screw up fairly often, and it's not malicious at all. He does try, um, but it was really hard because it's like here these people, these guests that are new to it, are getting it perfect. Um, and then for the most part, like when I'm in a situation like that, I'm fairly passable, and it was very difficult because like I knew that he was causing complexity there that really didn't need to be. And so I can really sort of imagine kind of like what you were going through in that moment too. Like, having some newcomers and it's just a really hard situation.
It is. It's a different situation, and I did not do what you did from a social media standpoint. I literally just deleted old accounts and created new ones and
Hmm.
invited people I wanted to invite to be a part of those new accounts, and kind of just fell off the face of the earth as far as I was concerned. Um, I just didn't. In fact, I completely deleted my Facebook account for probably a year and a half before I started a new one. And the only reason I started a new one was because somebody told me I needed one for selling hair products that I was doing for like half a month before I realized that I was not really passionate about that. Um, and so I have a Facebook page. I don't use it. I'm literally on it like maybe once every month if I'm lucky
Hmm.
or if I remember to log on there. And so I did not do a post like that. It probably would have made it easier for some people. I was in a friend's wedding and I like literally right before the wedding was like, "Hey, who all's going to be here that I'm going to have to come out to?"
Right? Yeah.
Because I'm about to be wearing a dress standing next to you and they have no idea who I am.
Hmm.
And so that was definitely fortunately he told me like, "Oh, we didn't invite anybody that doesn't already know." So um and that was their choice. It had nothing to do with me. They just had chosen not to invite people,
Hmm.
specific people, and they just weren't people that I also hadn't talked to in a while. So it worked out fine. But like that, navigating through that kind of stuff can be very difficult sometimes. Um, and having that support structure was really great. And knowing, even though like changing a motor throughout the night and having all of my team call me by the proper name and proper pronouns the entire time, I was less worried about what somebody else might say when they do that, because I knew that they were all on in my corner. If somebody had said something, they would have been the first ones to correct it and would have been the first ones to do something about it. I wouldn't have had to defend myself. And I think that was probably the best part about having a team as supportive as my team was.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, it's a big thing too, just like the whole that whole group dynamic and herd mentality where if everybody's going along with it and you've got one two new people that come into the mix, it's like it's awesome. And like that's how in a situation, that's how like that support structure, that having those allies in place can really be beneficial because of that exact reason right there. One, it's awesome to have people use your name and pronouns. First of all, it makes you feel amazing. Two, just to have that support and know that you've got people that have your back if things were to go a different direction. And then three, them just being there and doing it so that it really helps other people, um, because it is really big.
Absolutely.
So that's great, and that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, being able to kind of get back out there and do my thing and have those people backing me up, so that if somebody does ever try to say anything to me, I've got some people around me, and yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I think at least for me, and I think this might be even something that I had told you when you first started asking me questions about it, was like I feel fortunate that I have the team that I had.
Hmm.
They were super supportive of me throughout my transition, but also just like they were so awesome to deal with, not related to transition. Like we were just such good friends beforehand. It didn't matter who I was. And this is something that I've kind of lived by through my whole transition: is the people who matter won't care, and the people who care won't matter. And I feel like that's been a huge part of anybody that I tell. Like if I really wanted you to know, then I'm gonna tell you about it because I know that you don't care. And if you find out through the grapevine and you do care, then I didn't tell you because you don't really matter to me. And I
Right.
think that was like, for me, it was all about making sure the right people didn't find out through the grapevine.
Hmm.
I told the right people in person, and I knew that when I told them, they wouldn't react a certain way. And then having that support system was huge for me.
Yeah, totally.
So, what's the next race you're going to go to?
Let's see. I honestly, I almost went to King of the Hammers this last year.
I know we were talking about that.
I think there were a couple of reasons that I didn't. One is that my requirements for the accommodations are a little bit higher now that I'm a bit more high maintenance of a person. Uh, before having a shower around was optional. Um, Now when you're out in that dust, not so much. And then I think at that point too in my transition, like I was still like wouldn't go outside of the house without like heavy makeup on, and
Hmm.
I've since sort of backed off of that quite a bit, but still just having like a nice, clean, not dusty place where you can kind of just clean up and feel good. And if you are going to put on just a little makeup, like having a nice place to do that is beneficial. And so that didn't really work out. I wasn't able to like get a good spot there that essentially wasn't sleeping in a car, which is how I used to do it. And honestly, I did think about it, but then I ended up having to take my Chevy into the body shop, and they were working on it. So then that wasn't even an option. And so it's like all these things like stacked up. But I will definitely be at King of the Hammers next year. Um, it's not necessarily a race, but I am planning on taking my truck out, probably within the next month or so. just to get back out in the desert and run it and drive it around and have some fun with it. And yeah, just because I just miss it like so much. Like I had so many people yesterday comment on my video and just say like, "Oh my God, your eyes just like light up and you just have this super unique smile when the truck fires up." And like that's 100% where I am. Like it's a huge passion of mine, and I'm proud of that side of myself. I'm also proud now that that doesn't define who I am. I define who I am, but the fact that that's still exciting and still something I like doing is makes me really happy. But um, I would love to go out to a race. I think it's just finding the next one that some friends are going to, and now that I've got more friends that I'm out to as well, I think that makes a big thing. And um, I think one thing I was really afraid about was, at King of the Hammers, like going out there, uh, the fact that I do actually kind of have to be afraid. And not necessarily be afraid, but just be cautious and be aware of what I do because, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there that if you met them one on one and had a good conversation with them, they probably wouldn't care. But when they're there and they're drunk and they're sort of surrounded by a bunch of people
Hmm.
that they're trying to impress, then, the group mentality and that herd mentality kind of shifts the other direction. And you just don't want to necessarily put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
So I would be kind of afraid like going out there by myself and not having people around me that supported me. But it is kind of funny because I know another trans girl that's down in San Diego, and the company that she works for, they actually were out there as well, or it's one of her previous employers. They were out there spectating as well, and she, she had said that I probably could go hang out with them if I wanted to, and they would be open and supporting. So it's just kind of funny, and it kind of makes sense because like there are trans people and LGBTQ people, all throughout life. It's like
Yeah, there's
it doesn't necessarily pick certain people.
yeah, being LGBT does not mean you have to be against other like living life. Like it just is part of our lives for sure. I will
Hmm.
certainly be at KOH this year. So if you're there, we will have to meet up. You'll get to see the race Jeep that I used to race in. I will not be racing in it.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm hoping to be hanging out with most of them this time for sure, but we'll see what happens. Um, I'd love to be doing some photography and some videography while I'm out there, but
Hmm.
definitely excited for that. The Reno to Vegas is also on my radar for this year. That would be a lot of fun. I don't know if I'll be able to make it down there, but definitely going to be watching it on TV. Well, online, I think, because I don't think it's on TV yet. But we're not that big yet. Off road racing doesn't get that kind of coverage yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all that I've got for today. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say or any advice that you want to give to anybody that might be questioning their gender at the moment or even wanting to get into off road racing that's watching this?
I mean, honestly, we go on forever. When I get into topics like this, I'm definitely a talker. I would say if anybody does have any questions about transitioning, or about coming out, whether it be to friends, family, at work, I'm definitely open, willing to share any part of my story. I don't have any, I'm an open book. Um, but I would say sort of my takeaway my takeaway from this last week as I've sort of interacted more with uh, the off-roading side of my friends that I hadn't come out to because I was so afraid was I was the one that was afraid, and I made it a big deal and they didn't make it a big deal. And like I said, a lot of them already knew before I told them. And having these conversations with them now, every single time they're like, "Oh yeah, no problem. Come on over. It's not a big deal. We'll hang out and we'll talk and we'll BS and we'll do everything just like we did before." And I I think I had told you earlier, but one person said, it doesn't matter. It just it doesn't matter. Um, and so it's know that to people out there watching, know that it's probably a bigger deal for you than it is for most of these people. And then, um, like you said, if they're not on board, then they shouldn't be on board.
Yeah,
So
100%. Again, if they matter to you, they won't care. And if they don't, or if you don't care about them, then what they say doesn't matter. Um, well, I appreciate you being on, and I would certainly look forward to hopefully seeing you at KOH next year. Maybe sooner. Hopefully, we can
definitely,
both find our way to some race this year that will mean that we get to say hello before then. But otherwise, KOH for sure. Anybody that wants to come check out the racing for sure. Definitely lots of people out there are going to be supportive, far more than you might think. And in the community itself, both Allison and me have had great experiences with people just not really caring. It's all about the racing. That's really all that matters.
yeah. And I do plan to race again. It's a big goal of mine to race off road as openly trans.
Well, if you ever need a
Um,
co-driver, let me know.
will do.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for our podcast today. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Make sure you subscribe and tune in next time for more stories like Allison's. We are going to have a lot of guests on this show that are just going to be able to share their unique experiences and stories. And I look forward to being able to share all of those with all of you.